He's become the obstructionist in chief and running the Senate like he's the king, and he's damaging severely the Senate and hurting our chances to solve the big problems that are facing our country. You know, I come at this as from the point of view of a conservative who likes to solve problems. And I think I've demonstrated, both as governor and as senator, my interest in doing that, my capacity to do it. But I'm deeply disappointed by the power play that occurred 2 weeks ago as we were leaving when the Senate changed its rules. It's not really about the filibuster. I mean, the number of Obama nominees who have been denied their seats by filibusters is the following: is 7. 7. And the only reason 5 of those have been, who were judges, was because Democrats blocked 5 Republican judges. So it was a made-up controversy, and it was done purely as a power play. And as Senator Levin said, it changes the Senate to a place where a majority can do anything it wants at any time. And as he said, a Senate in which a majority can do anything it wants at any time is a Senate without any rules. It'd be just like Vanderbilt scoring on the last play of the game in Knoxville, and Tennessee would say, well, we're the home team, we'll just add 20 minutes to the game or 20 yards to the field. Well, Tennessee fans would be happy this year, but next year when Tennessee plays at Vanderbilt and Vanderbilt does it to Tennessee, then they won't be happy and no one will respect the game. So I'm very disappointed by what happened as we were leaving town 2 weeks ago, and I'm not sure what the consequences of it will be. The difference is he didn't do it. And the reason he didn't was because Harry Reid said it would be the end of the Senate. That's what he said in his book in 2006. And because I suggested, and he writes about this in his book, I suggested the Gang of 14, and we agreed that we wouldn't do that. We had a group of Republicans and Democrats who said we won't do that, and we'll only block nominees by cloture, by filibuster, in extraordinary circumstances. And the Democrats had blocked 10 of Bush's, 10 judges. That was the first time in the history of the country that this cloture vote had ever been used for that purpose. And the end result was we won't do it. And so some senators stood up and said, let's keep the Senate a place where we slow legislation down and we give minority voices a chance to be heard, and that's the big difference now. I mean, I don't know where this leads, really. Well, one, we should pass Senator Johnson's bill, which would extend for permanently the president's put into law the president's promise. If you like your insurance, you can keep it. I mean, just in the last few days, you covered the story about the Cover 10 insurance in Tennessee, which we've been getting all sorts of calls about. I mean, 16,000 people who are able to afford this limited amount of insurance, it fits their needs, is suddenly outlawed under Obamacare. So that'd be the first thing we'd like to do, keep it, put the president's promise into law. Second thing we would like to do is to begin to move the whole health care law in a different direction toward competition and choice and lower costs with a series of steps, not a big comprehensive plan, like being able to buy insurance across state lines, allowing small businesses to pool their resources and offer insurance to their employees. I mean, there are 8 or 10 of these steps that we've outlined in legislative proposals. Each case, we're ready to pass them. On the small business plan, for example, the Congressional Budget Office says if you allow smaller businesses to pool their resources and spread the risk, it would allow 750,000 more Americans to be covered and at a lower cost. So that's one step. Or if you live in Tennessee and a Kentucky company is offering an insurance plan that fits your needs and you can afford and you want to buy it, I think you should be able to. That's the best way to do that. The best way to cover more people is to create more choices and lower the cost, and Obamacare on the whole is increasing the cost. I would have preferred the Senate bill. The Senate bill basically said, and we passed it unanimously out of our Senate committee, that said, if you're going to sell sterile products without prescriptions across state lines, you've got to be regulated by the FDA. I would have preferred that. But we couldn't get that past the House. What we did get, I believe, and the FDA commissioner, Dr. Hamburg, who made a good statement this week, is a very important step forward for these reasons. One, it clears up the finger pointing. Accountability, in my judgment, was the biggest problem, because I would sit there at a hearing and Massachusetts State Board was pointing at the FDA and the FDA was pointing at Massachusetts, and there was language in the law that would have prevented the FDA from going into a place like the Massachusetts compounding pharmacy and taking and inspecting it. And it should have been, because the Massachusetts pharmacy was a manufacturer. It should have been regulated by the FDA based upon its practices. But so many pharmacies had challenged the authority of the FDA that there was great confusion about whose job it was to solve that problem. So we eliminated that. We made it clear who's on the flagpole. It's either the FDA or the state board. Now, the second thing it does is it creates this new category of large compounding pharmacies that sell lots of sterile products to hospitals and doctors. And it gives them the option of being regulated by the FDA. Now, there's legitimate criticism of that. You could say, well, that's a loophole. You don't have to be regulated by the FDA. And I prefer that they would be. That was what the Senate bill required. But I think this is an important step forward, because I think doctors and hospitals are going to think long and hard about buying big batches of sterile compounded drugs from institutions that aren't regulated by the FDA. And now that that option is clearly available, and the FDA this week said it was going to encourage these outsourcing facilities to be regulated by the FDA, I think you'll see a big shift in the marketplace. And it's possible that the marketplace itself will force most large compounding pharmacies into FDA regulation. And the third thing the bill did, and nobody paid much attention to it because it just rode along with it, was what this track and trace legislation, which is really huge, just been worked on for 10 years or several years. But it means that the 4 billion prescriptions a year that are written in the United States will each one have a serial number, and you'll be able to track it all the way to the person to whom it's sold, so you can avoid counterfeiting or a variety of other problems. So taken together, I think the bill was a very important piece of legislation, and like most things that go through the democratic process, it's not what each of us would want, but Dr. Hamburg told us that if we didn't act, it wasn't a question of whether there might be another tragedy. She said there will be, and she said after we acted that it was an important step forward. So I think it's progress. But I don't want anybody to think that it's going to absolutely cure every problem, but it's progress. Well, I visited with Congressman Whitfield and his wife. They came to see me, and let me start here. The Tennessee walking horse is one of Tennessee's signature one of Tennessee's signature events, the celebration. I mean, it's right up there with Elvis and Dolly and Jack Daniels and the Tennessee Waltz. I mean, when I went to Japan for the first time to recruit Nissan in 1979, I was surprised to learn that the emperor had a Tennessee walking horse. And so it's an important Tennessee tradition. And the first major Nissan supplier that came here, Calsonic, its gift to Shelbyville when it was to build a big stadium for the celebration. So it's a big part of Tennessee. It's a big part of Tennessee. Second, soaring is wrong. It's illegal. People are being indicted today because of it, and it ought to be cleaned up and stopped. I'm examining the bill that Congressman Whitfield has. I know he's sincere about it. I'm told by veterinarians and people who show horses that it would decimate the tradition of the Tennessee walking horse, and that it has unnecessary provisions in it. I've been to the celebration a number of times. I'm not an expert on veterinary medicine, but I know that of the inspections that they have there, that almost all of them are, 96, 98% successful. So I think it probably comes down to the industry itself doing a better job of self-regulating, finding a way to put more resources into hiring independent veterinarians whenever possible to do the examinations of the horses. But that's hard to do because that's weekend work, and veterinarians want to be paid for their work, and if the taxpayer's not going to pay them and the horse owners can't afford to pay them, that creates a dilemma on resources. So I'll work with the industry and with members of Congress to try to find more resources for independent veterinarian examination of horses at shows. I think that's probably where the issue can best be solved. If 10 of the largest insurance companies in the world came around and told me my house had a good chance of burning down, I'd buy some insurance. And all the major national academies have said that we have global warming and that humans are a cause of it. My version of the insurance to buy is different than the Democrats. The Democrats want this contraption called cap and trade, and to raise the price of carbon. I go a different direction. I'd like to double energy research and find new forms of cheap, clean energy that lowers that's the way to get rid of carbon. For example, nuclear power gets rid of carbon, and the research that the new small nuclear reactors, two of which are going to be built at Oak Ridge, the first two of which are I think a way for us to have both baseload power and pollution-free power. A second way to do it is support for research in the little organization we call ARPA-E, which is like in the Defense Department, there's a little agency called DARPA, which has brought in outstanding technologies and invested in them for 2 or 3 years and then thrown them back out in the marketplace and sometimes been the customer. And out of that's come startling things. I mean, the internet, stealth, GPS, all came out of DARPA. So the America Competes legislation I sponsored a few years ago created a cousin of DARPA in the Energy Department. And they're doing some very interesting things in their first 2 or 3 years. One of them is one company they've invested in has cut the density of a lithium battery in half, which means electric cars could go twice as far, cost less. A second company is, and this is more to the point on carbon, is combining electricity with CO2 and from that producing a fuel that can be sold commercially. Well, if that works, then we could burn all the coal we have all the time because we know what to do about sulfur, nitrogen, and mercury. We just don't know how to recapture carbon. And if we can recapture it and sell it in a commercial way, why, we'll have cheap, clean energy. So we could have coal and nuclear power in that way. So I believe it's real, but I think that I don't want to be like Germany. I was in Germany about a year ago, and they adopted cap and trade. They built a lot. They subsidized windmills and solar panels, which disgraced the landscape and subsidized Chinese solar panel manufacturers. They stopped buying they closed their nuclear power plants and started buying nuclear power from France. And they're buying natural gas from Russia, of all people. And their prices are the highest or nearly highest in Europe. And I asked the minister there, I said, well, what do you tell a company that says, we'd like to move here, but we're concerned about the cost of electricity? He said, I would tell them to go to some other country. So I think we have this great advantage in the United States with cheap power, and we want it clean too. And our research has shown us how to get a lot of natural gas. So let's see if we can do the same with other forms of power, like capturing carbon from coal plants. That's a good question. The reason I'm pausing a little bit is because I expect it will be less after the Senate rules changed 10 weeks ago. Not very much. The president has the president is a very talented person in his, he's smart, he's a very good communicator, a good father, but he's a poor executive and he's poor with relationships on the Hill. He doesn't seem to have that instinct or capacity for executive leadership that governors and presidents need. And so he doesn't have many relationships on the Hill. I mean, President Johnson used to show up in Senator Dirksen's office unannounced and have a drink with him. President Obama and Mitch McConnell didn't have a single one-on-one meeting in 4 years. So, and I don't have, I have very little direct relationship with the president.
Senator Corker, when he was here, he said he talks quite a bit to Dennis McDonough, who's chief of staff.
I've talked with Dennis some, and he's done a better job than previous chiefs of staff of reaching out. But and for example, on the student loan agreement we came to, which was a very good agreement, and it cut the interest rates for student loans in half for right now, and put a marketplace pricing mechanism on it that takes it out of politics. The president was very involved in that, and he did a good job. But on otherwise, he's he's AWOL. Here, let me give you a good example. Here we are at this budget agreement. Everybody in Washington knows what we should do about the budget. We have two sides to the budget. One side is going up at the rate of 74% over the next 10 years, and that's entitlement, Medicare, Medicaid, all that. The other side is national defense, national parks, education, cancer research. It's about 40% of the budget. It's going up barely. So what we need to do is restrain the growth over here and move some of the money over here so we can fund research, fund the military. Everybody knows we need to do that. The president's even made some good proposals from doing that in his budget. But he's not the engineer on the train. You have Paul Ryan and Patty Murray meeting, and they may come up with a little bitty deal. But the president doesn't seem to have the capacity to take an issue like Lyndon Johnson did on the Civil Rights Act, or Bill Clinton did on welfare, or George Bush did on taxes, and hammer out a legislative result. I mean, if I'd waited for the state legislature to build the best four-lane highway system in the nation, we'd still be driving on dirt roads. I mean, it took the governor to lay out a plan, and then the legislature responded well. And a lot of why Washington doesn't work is because the president doesn't show the kind of executive leadership he should. And the other reason it doesn't work, in my opinion, is Senator Reid has appointed himself king of the Senate and isn't allowing senators to offer amendments to debate. It's like being invited to join the Grand Ole Opry and not being allowed to sing.